Throughout the Second World War, millions of people were sent to concentration camps as they were being persecuted. The Nazis launched a huge campaign of persecution upon religious groups, and even those who were considered Christian were the victims of the Nazis and the SS. Hitler, inside many execution chambers across Germany, would execute many priests and nuns using devices such as the guillotine. It was a very dangerous time for people, especially of a religious persuasion, because many spoke out against the dictator of Nazi Germany, and one man who did this was Alois Grimm, a Jesuit priest who was executed for his crimes inside of a prison. He was a very peaceful and religious man, but ultimately his words against Hitler were considered hostile, and for this the regime deemed he needed to pay the ultimate price. Join us today as we look at the execution of the priest that stood up to Hitler, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Alois Grimm was born in October 1886 inside of Kulsheim in Germany, and he had a rather normal upbringing. He, following attending high school, did not know whether to pursue a career in the armed forces, specifically the Navy, or whether to instead become a priest. But his father was a very devoted Catholic, and he and Alois would go to the Netherlands to become members of the Jesuits. At this time the religious group had been banned in Germany, and in 1907 he became a member of the Society of Jesus. He studied with the group, but as the First World War broke out, Alois paused his studies and he went to spend time as a nurse inside of military hospitals, caring for those who had been injured on the battlefield. But in 1920, after the conflict had come to an end, he finally was ordained as a priest, and he was then sent to the German-speaking Catholic mission in Florence in Italy. He continued to study different topics, including classical languages and history, and at this time it was clear he was a very learned man. But Alois Grimm would then impart his knowledge onto children, working as a schoolteacher, and when he went to Germany he then also taught inside of a college. Alois Grimm was considered a talented member of the Catholic Church and of the Jesuit group, and he continued to work writing essays on religion, and he was a keen researcher. But inside of Germany at the time, Nazism was on the rise, and this caused issues for a number of Jesuits. Many of the group were against the Nazi Party and its ideology, and Father Grimm was against the politics of the Nazis and Hitler. He then began to speak out more and more about them, and this began to attract criticism and the attention of powerful Nazis and the authorities. During lectures he would speak ill about Hitler and the political party, and he would also speak to colleagues in this manner. During one lecture he said, "We live in a time in which the Church of God is under attack like never before. Not compassion or pity, honour is being demanded today. But if the orders of this world are contrary to the orders of Christ, then the orders of the world are obviously wrong. Every human authority, yes, the authority of the whole people too, has to step back before the authority of Christ." He also went on to say, "We live in a difficult time. Our responsibility before God and before the coming centuries will be enormous. Our prayer, work and sacrifice must contribute, so that the present and future belong to Christ. This is a large and beautiful calling, which should fill us with joy, despite of all the sufferings. This is not time for petty jealousies or self-pity. Everything is at stake." Another teacher at the college where Grimm taught stated that, "Grimm talked in derogatory ways about our new ideology. I hope we will shut him up for a long time, or better even, forever." He was now attracting a significant amount of hostility, even amongst the staff of his college, and because of this he was living very dangerously. All it needed was someone to speak to the Gestapo about this, and he would have been arrested. He said, though, about the hostility, "If something happens to me, it would be my greatest honour and luck." He was fearless, and he knew that he was a man of his convictions, and he knew whatever the Nazis threw at him, he could face. But Grimm's ideas were that by speaking out, it would encourage more people to question the regime that would become ingrained in history with the persecution and slaughter of millions. But the Nazis would ramp up their anger towards the Jesuits, and they were expelled from St. Blasien in 1939. Alois Grimm with this then went to Austria, where he taught Latin at a Catholic school, and he worked in the local area. However, in 1943, an SS man approached Grimm and asked him how to become part of the Catholic Church. But the soldier was given religious instruction from the priest, and his wife and child were also absorbed into the church. But what Father Grimm was doing and instructing people to become Catholics under Nazi occupation was banned, and this was illegal. But the soldier then spoke to a friend who also wanted to become part of the church, but the Gestapo would find out about this. In October 1943 he was arrested and was interrogated in a prison in Innsbruck. He had been arrested due to the fact the SS man's acquaintance was actually a Gestapo spy. But inside of the prison in Innsbruck, Alois Grimm was brutalised and was tortured heavily. But he was interrogated even more for weeks, and he was then sent to Berlin, in the heart of the Nazi government, and Father Grimm was then tortured even more. But he was then in 1944 sent to the People's Court, the Nazi courts inside of Germany that were very biased, and many of the proceedings were already prejudged, which resulted in hundreds of people being sentenced to death for their dissent against Hitler. He was accused of ideological offences against the Third Reich, and Father Grimm's converts, the SS men, spoke out against him. Grimm said he'd been trapped, and Roland Freisler, the infamous Nazi judge, then screamed at Alois Grimm. He said to the priest, "Fishes are caught in different ways. I have to be very careful to catch a trout. If I want to catch a Jesuit, I have to use special methods. You swallowed it. You proved us right." The defence lawyer said, "Father Grimm's defence belongs to the most frightful memories of my life. It has to do with a piece of historical truth that we must hold on to, especially in a time that cheapens the memory of such events." But Roland Freisler will take away Father Grimm's civil rights and privileges, and for undermining the spirit of the German army, and for encouraging defeatism, he was sentenced to death. Following his death sentence, Grimm wrote, "The hour has come. I am going home into eternity. In a few hours I will stand in front of my judge, my Redeemer, and my Father. It is God's will to be done everywhere. Don't mourn over me. I am returning home. You have to wait. I give my life for the kingdom of God, which knows no end, for the society of Jesus, for the youth and religion of our homeland." He was then transferred to the Brandenburg-Gurden prison and was held there to await his execution. This prison had been selected as a central execution site throughout Germany by the order of Hitler. With this, a new execution chamber had been installed, as the old one was previously a garage. This new facility had a guillotine and a gallows inside it, and around 2,700 executions took place, with most of them being sentenced to death by Roland Freisler and the People's Court. Alois Grimm, on the 11th of September 1944, within a year of the war coming to an end in Europe, was taken from his prison cell into the execution chamber of the prison. He was not to be executed on the guillotine, but instead was executed on the gallows. An executioner confirmed his identity before he was led forward to the execution device. A noose was secured around the priest's neck, and he was stood on a stool before this was removed, and the priest was left hanging. Within minutes, he was executed. Father Alois Grimm was a Jesuit priest who was one of many who had been persecuted throughout the centuries. Even during the Tudor period, these Catholics were being hunted and were forced to hide out inside of large houses in England.